how incredibly disappointing Ferrari were after a very good Friday. What happened to them? I mean, they were hopeless in qualifying, and then the race was a joke, wasn't it? You know, for sure Lando's good, but he's not unbeatable, that's for sure. I mean, he's not Max Verstappen, I can tell you that. He doesn't have the same short corners as Max. And in equal cars, Max is a faster driver. I would sell my house on that. We're talking about standards here. Obviously, by most standards, Oscar Piastri is a brilliant racing driver. I'm talking about winning the World Championship and beating Lando Norris. That's a completely different mountain to climb. But it's climbable, and I just don't think he did a very good job in the first, foothills of the mountain in Australia. If you get to a really clinical circuit, high downforce circuit, at the moment, based on everything, if Red Bull don't find a considerable amount of additional downforce, McLaren are just going to disappear.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the F1 Hour. With me, my friend and yours, the goatiest of all F1 minds to have ever goated, the one that they call Peter D. Windsor. How are you doing, good sir?
I'm great, Cameron. A bit knackered, I have to say, after the whole 3-day palaver of the Australian Grand Prix. I was in Europe, so, getting up early in the mornings, I suppose it's good for the soul, isn't it? And get up, and I watched whatever I was going to watch, and then I took Dexter for a long walk as the birds were chirping and the sun was coming up, and then back to doing a bit of videoing. So I'm fine. I can't complain at all. Had some good golf yesterday afternoon as well. Not me, but Jack.
Good man. Let me ask you about the Australian Grand Prix, then, Mr. Windsor. What was the biggest story to come out of the weekend?
Well, I can only speak from my own field of perception, and that was I was anticipating a Mansell, Piquet, Moss, Fangio, Senna, Prost type season between Lando and Oscar, based on how good I think Oscar is naturally. And I've made several comments over the back half of last year and over the winter that I was a little bit nervous about how Oscar's driving seems to have been verging more towards Lando's style of quite wide corner entries, getting the power on as soon as you can, obviously being neat and tidy, that goes without saying, rather than using the talent, the innate talent that he has to get the car in a bit earlier and shorten the corners, a bit like Max. And you'll recall that Monaco Grand Prix a couple of years ago, he followed Max for quite a long time. And immediately after that, he started to drive like Max, a little bit like Max anyway. So I was intrigued more than anything else to see how Oscar was going to come out and hit the ground at the Australian Grand Prix, because if he was there taking it right to Lando, maybe out qualifying him, maybe winning the race, then we're in for a great season. But I have to say I was quite disappointed because he got beaten in qualifying in the usual way. He was late braking, this and that, but just a couple of small glitches which cost him time, particularly turn 3, braking for turn 3. And then in the race, he did a good job off the line and gave Lando the first corner. You got to give him credit for that, and because he could have gone down the inside Hungary style, but he didn't do that, and that was good. And then he looked quite strong. He got passed by Max on the outside. That was incredible, really, for me, that a guy in his position could have let himself be passed by Max on the outside of turn 2. But anyway, he then recovered from all that and pressured Max into a mistake, with Max's tyres going off much faster than the McLarens, obviously, the Red Bulls. And then he was catching Lando quite quickly, which he would in that stage of the race. It was still wet offline, obviously. And, if you're leading the race and the track's drying, the last thing, if you've got a gap, the last thing you want to do is start pushing to the point where you might hit a curb or hit the water. So Lando's obviously driving at the slowest possible speed he can drive at which to lead the race at that point. So Oscar caught him, which was no big deal. And then there was, a bit of team orders about hold station, and then they changed their mind as you can race. And he went off, he had a real chance to win that race when Lando went off, and he would have seen Lando going off in the wet on slicks. And, it's extraordinary to me that he didn't just slow right down, take the lead and win the race. I just find it extraordinary. And so I'm a bit disappointed, really. Not disappointed per se with Oscar's driving yesterday. It is what it is. But I just think I'm not quite as ebullient about the season being this incredible head-on battle between Lando and Oscar as I thought it might be, given how talented Oscar is. But he doesn't seem to be blossoming in the way that, Max blossomed the minute he got into Red Bull from Toro Rosso, and I find that a little bit disappointing, really. But having said that, I thought Max drove beautifully, and I think that's something that we should all remind ourselves how good this guy is. I mean, that car, I wouldn't have said that car's a lot better than a Mercedes or a Ferrari, to be honest. And he was the only guy out there staying with the McLarens, which quite patently we know are sort of 3/10 quicker. We saw that in qualifying with that amount of grip and downforce. You saw how slow they were on the straight in the dry. That's how much downforce they've got. And yes, there's Max out there doing that. So there's two talking points. And I think the third was how incredibly disappointing Ferrari were after a very good Friday. What happened to them? I mean, they were hopeless in qualifying. And then the race was a joke, wasn't it? I mean, Lewis couldn't even get past Albon. Incredible. I say even Albon. All the Albon Williams fans say, "What do you mean?" But the reality is, you're a factory Ferrari driver. I'm sorry, if Enzo Ferrari was alive today, he'd be saying, "What is going on? This new driver can't even pass Alex Albon what is he in a Williams? He's driving a Ferrari." And so, then he gets passed by Oscar on the last lap in a very embarrassing way as well. So yeah, I thought that those were the three main things, weren't they?
Let's talk about Oscar first, because I will see your assertions, Peter, and raise you this. Don't you think, as far as Oscar Piastri in his third season in Formula One, that we as F1 fans need to give him just a little bit of grace? This is Lando's 7th season now, and Lando is a brilliant driver. Again, Peter, you've let me know how highly you think of Lando. So if that's the benchmark, that Oscar was able to keep with Lando for 90% of the race, mistakes notwithstanding, qualify within a tenth of him, don't you think in under those umbrella headings that Oscar's worthy of praise rather than criticism?
No, not really. I think he's got a very good car, very good teammate from which he can learn certain things. Very, very good team. He's incredibly talented. He hasn't got a worry in the world. He's got a long-term contract. He's got all the money he needs in the bank. Why wouldn't he be out there beating Lando Norris? I mean, if he is going to be the next Jackie Stewart, the next Ayrton Senna, the next Niki Lauda, he needs to be dominating. He needs to be ahead of Lando Norris. It's not impossible. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but it's not impossible for a guy with that amount of talent. And he's not. It was a very poor opening race if he is going to be dominating the way the drivers I mentioned dominated various teammates. For sure Lando's good, but he's not unbeatable. That's for sure. I mean, he's not Max Verstappen. I can tell you that. He doesn't have the same short corners as Max. And in equal cars, Max is a faster driver. I would sell my house on that. And so Oscar's got a real opportunity to do that. And it just looks like he's fallen into the whole digitized world of McLaren and studying telemetry and sort of basically copying Lando. And he may well end up as good as Lando by the end of the year, but that's not going to beat Lando, is it? You might as well do something different. That's my point. And a racing driver wants to win. He doesn't want to be second. And being beaten by your teammate is about the worst possible thing you can do. And I know a lot of people may say, "Oh, Peter, you're just thinking of the past and the old days and everything." But think about Jackie Stewart's first season in Formula One, 65. He's got Graham Hill alongside him, and he's basically beating Graham Hill in a very, very quick car, the BRM, 70% of the time, And Graham Hill was a world champion by then. So, I rest my case. We're talking about standards here. Obviously, by most standards, Oscar Piastri is a brilliant racing driver. I'm talking about winning the world championship and beating Lando Norris. That's a completely different mountain to climb, but it's climbable. And I just don't think he did a very good job in the first, foothills of the mountain in Australia. Sure. That's my point. Don't get me wrong. Of course, Oscar's good. Of course, he's capable of winning a multitude of F2 races. But it does show that. And I think a lot of the stuff we saw with the young guys going off, it does show. I mean, there's two things here. One is, I know we're going for the tangent here, but it kind of comes under the Oscar heading of dominating Formula 2 and then finding a bit of a stumbling block now with Lando. And it does come under the heading. And Lando, not brilliant in Formula 2, you got to say, in terms of results. And I think there's two things there. One, the reason I go on about Oscar is because he does have this rare ability to be able to feel the front of the car enough and to be sensitive enough to be able to drive very compact short corners and to create that whole system of working in the racing car. I think Kimi Antonelli has that as well, of all the young guys. But I think that one of the problems is that there's just not enough driving in Formula 2 and Formula 3. There's a lot of racing, there's a lot of qualifying under pressure, there's a lot of half-hour practice sessions, but there's not a lot of driving where you can go out and start playing with the front end and doing things. And yeah, they can go and rent, old racing cars and do that, but it's not the same thing. And I think what we saw with all those young guys going off, most of them going off and having trouble, is just sheer lack of driving. And you could say, oh, they do all these races, but you don't learn in races. What you learn in races is how not to get a penalty for impeding and all that rubbish. You don't actually learn how to drive with understeer and graining tyres and in the semi-wet on slicks and all the things that are really important. And we don't have enough mileage anymore. And that's why so many of those young kids went off yesterday. And also because most of them, because they don't have a lot of mileage, are sort of late braking, wide turn-in merchants who are leaning on the outside rear of the car all the time, asking too much of the car would change the direction, and that's the only way they know how to drive. And if they go off, it's I don't know what happened to the rear, the grip changed or whatever. And of course it changes every corner, every lap. But if you drive within that, with short corners, you're leaving a margin. You've got a margin with which to move. And that's why guys like Max don't make a lot of mistakes in difficult conditions, because they're constantly managing the car inside an envelope that guys like, dare I say it, Oscar Piastri now don't have.
Wowzers, Mr. Windsor, making headlines over here, isn't he?
Well, I don't know about that, but I feel for young guys that are doing Formula 3 and Formula 2 and spending whatever it is, 1 million in Formula 3 and then another 2 million in Formula 2 for 2 years. And they're not actually getting a lot of useful mileage. All they're getting is, I'm in Formula 2, wow. And we saw the result of that yesterday. Isaac Hadjar has looked very good in Formula 2. And I had to revise my opinion on Friday. Watching him in Formula 2, I thought, yeah, he has got quite a lot of feel, this guy, for the front end, and he's very good. But I mean, the way he went off on the formation lap was just like, it was just like, I don't know what happened. Just caught me by surprise. Go and do a slow-mo of how Max does formation laps, and try to get his throttle inputs. That would be the key thing. And it's because he's never been in that situation. He hasn't done enough of it. And they say, he's not very experienced. Well, that's not good enough. By the time they get to Formula 1, they should be good enough.
Very good shout. We'll talk about rookies. I just want to ask you one final one on McLaren, Mr. Windsor. We've talked ad infinitum about Zak Brown and Andrea Stella's unwilling to make some decisions under the umbrella heading of driver hierarchy, and that they sacrificed Lando Norris's campaign last year because of that. Before the Grand Prix, the Australian Grand Prix this weekend, Zak Brown said something to the effect of, let the drivers decide who's going to be drivers champion this year, which filled me with woe and dread that they would repeat the mistakes of Christmas past. This time they told Oscar to back off, hold station, don't challenge Lando, to which the F1 community loses its mind and said, team orders, they're ruining Formula 1. What are we doing here? Do you support Zak Brown's decision to call off the fight between his two drivers?
Well, it was only a very temporary call off, and I do support that. Yeah, if I'd said to my drivers before the race, in a situation they were in, front row of the grid, good chance of winning it 1-2, I would have said, yeah, early in the season, we've got to let you guys race. You're both over 21. The rules. Don't hit one another, whatever. The whole Christian Horner thing. Race closely, but don't touch one another, all that stuff, whatever it means. I mean, I've got to say here, I would never have put those two together in the first place. I would have Daniel Ricciardo in the other car. But anyway, now that you've given me this ridiculous thing where you've got two basic number one drivers, I would, in the situation where, as I said before, the track is wet offline, the curbs are wet, and certain parts of the circuit are wetter than others, and the intermediates are going off. You're hoping that the track's going to dry and they might become slicks before you have to come in for slicks, things like that. And Lando's out there leading the race nicely as he has, and it's quite obvious, looking at his lap times, that he could probably go a second and a half lap quicker if he wanted to, but he's just driving around at the pace he needs to drive around at in which to lead the race comfortably. And Oscar's catching him, therefore, because you've got a goal there, and it's not easy to say, oh, he's brake now, brake a little bit later, get the power in here. Oh, wow, I'm nearer him, and suddenly you've caught him. It's very easy at that point to say, oh, wow, Oscar, he's going to pass Lando. Of course, Lando could have gone second a lap quicker, and of course he would have pulled away from Oscar. And then Oscar might have tried to be harder. So I would have got on the radio and done exactly the same thing. I would have said, just hold it, wait for the conditions to change, settle down. It's not the moment to make a pass if you're going to do it. Just use your head. We'll sort it out towards the end of the race. So the conditions are still very, very dodgy. And I think they made exactly the right call. And then when things did start to clarify and it got a little bit drier and the intermediates were giving more grip now because the tread was going away, but yeah, okay, you can do a bit of racing now. And we all knew that, because that moment, because the racing isn't, I'm going to allow Oscar to race him. When you make the decision, you're both racing one another. What you're basically saying is to Lando, you can go a bit quicker now if you want, because there's no way in the world Oscar Piastri would have beaten Lando Norris yesterday. I can tell you that. He might have got very close to him and he might have got alongside him and they might have had a T-bone type shunt, but there's no way he would have beaten him. And because Lando had so much in hand. And anyone in the Formula One community that doesn't realize that, I don't know what you call in the Formula One community, but obviously they don't have a clue about Formula One. Lando had a lot in hand. So there's no way, what you're doing is you're protecting Lando when you say that. You're not saying, hold back Oscar, we don't want to race. And I think they did the right thing. I think they handled it. I think they handled that side of it as well as they can handle it, given that they've got this incredibly uncomfortable situation of two number one drivers. And as I said before, I would never have done that. I would have had Niki Lauda, Clay Regazzoni, or so many others, Michael Schumacher and X.
But Peter, you're ruining F1. You're destroying the fun.
Oh, well, I'm sorry about that. I loved F1 when it was black and white pictures in Motoring News and there were 35,000 spectators and the Australian Grand Prix was in Adelaide and we went to Zandvoort in the old circuit and Gilles Villeneuve had a motorhome. So, and we went to the Nürburgring. So I don't care, to be honest. To me, I'm talking about the heart and soul of the sport. I'm not talking about a business that needs to sell itself on Wall Street. I don't care about that. I'm more interested in relating Ignazio Giunti's P4 in his debut Grand Prix for Ferrari at Spa in 1970 with Kimi Antonelli's. And we shouldn't forget Giunti's achievement. I hope many people, a lot of people doing the TV commentary immediately said, wow, Ignazio Giunti, P4 first race, mega. Kimi Antonelli. Great comparison. I'm not convinced Antonelli is as good as Giunti was, but anyway.
We'll talk about Antonelli. Yeah. Peter.
Well, let's talk about Giunti.
It's a good shout. It's a very good
Wasn't he the first guy ever to have a Mega Bellstar livery helmet? He had the Aztec Eagle, didn't he, on his helmet? 1970. I mean, Jochen Rindt had it plain white with this space for sale written in handwriting. Ignazio Giunti had the Aztec Eagle. P4, first Grand Prix for Ferrari.
Oh, Mr. Windsor, you're just showing
at a time when points were only down to 6, so P4 meant a lot more then.
The knowledge is God.
Well, it's not knowledge. I mean, just everybody would know about Ignazio Giunti, I'm sure. It's just common knowledge, isn't it?
Fair play. Let me ask you about McLaren finally, though. And Lando Norris specifically.
Yeah.
Lando Norris said something that I thought was quite pertinent in the post-race presser, that he said that whole circumstance was brand new for him. He'd never consolidated P1 and had to fend off a fire-breathing dragon in Max Verstappen towards the latter stages of the Grand Prix. And so too, spin of very many plates in changeable, variable conditions.
Yeah, it was. It was the first time he's had that sort of race, wasn't it?
So then is the conclusion that we take from that, Peter, that this is Lando 2.0, that he's very different to the Lando in 2024 that would have ceded position on the first lap to Oscar and Max potentially, that wouldn't have checked his wing mirrors and fended off Max in a very, very nuanced, educated way.
Well, I think you're overcomplicating it, Cameron. I think the old Lando might have blown the start, actually, to be honest, and wouldn't have been in a position to have to defend anybody. So I think what you can say is, very simply, he just makes better starts now. He makes good starts all the time. So that's a great improvement, and you would expect that anyway, wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you? Guys as talented as that and all the engineering know-how at McLaren to help him with the starts. So he makes great starts. So everybody's got to forget about that business of Lando's no good off the line. And as for the rest of it, I don't think he's a lot different, to be honest. I think he's the same guy that he was in Formula 3. People have never really given him credit enough for being how quick he is, how good he is, and how much of a racer he is, and how competitive he is. And I don't remember him giving wins away sort of 3 laps to go. When did he do that?
So I mean, if you're talking last season, Peter, there were a few wins that he gave away, not necessarily just in the last 3 laps, but just at the altar of mistakes.
A couple of funny things in
Hungary,
the middle. Yeah, okay,
Austria.
But I think he's still capable of doing that. I think he probably thinks a little bit too much, and if the strategy doesn't go correctly, and he's got the wrong tires on at the wrong moment, he still drives well, but he probably thinks a bit too much about it. A bit like David Coulthard, a bit too intelligent maybe to be a racing driver in that moment of the race. You need to be a bit more of an animal and just get on with it. And I don't think that'll ever leave Lando. He's an intelligent guy, but that's fine. You work around that. If you're a good team, you work around that, and you just make sure he's confident all the time and he knows what's going on. And if a mistake is made, you live with it. And I think McLaren, to be honest with you, are quite good. When they make a mistake, I think now Lando doesn't overreact. And equally, if he makes a mistake, I don't think they overreact. So that's a really nice balance to have. And yeah, I mean, what he did yesterday was a culmination of a lot of his driving last year in one chapter, and he did everything perfectly. The start, the early laps, the drying laps, the pressure from Piastri, the pit stops, never easy in those conditions, and going off and doing a great job when he went off. I'm still amazed, as I say, that Piastri didn't take the lead at that point and win the race. And because that's the beauty of being second in a semi-wet race, isn't it? If the guy in front makes a mistake, Zak, you're there. Sorry, I shouldn't say Zak. Well, I could say Zak, I suppose.
Go on, and let me ask you about Lando and Max going forward, because I think there was a fear that McLaren have ostensibly the quickest machine on the grid to the tune of 3 or 4 tenths. Using that as a backdrop, Peter, what do you make of Max's performance yesterday in an RB20, super difficult to drive, mercurial, understeery, snap oversteer, changeable conditions, and yet Max is there in the critical times, latter stages of the Grand Prix, ominous as ever, metronomic as ever, breathing down the neck of Lando Norris. How good was the drive of Max Verstappen yesterday?
I thought he was fire breathing.
Yes.
It was a very, very nice turn of phrase by Lando there. Oh, I thought it was just absolutely sublime. It's very difficult to give enough credit to Max's drive yesterday, and because we saw how big the advantage was for McLaren in qualifying. Max did a really good job in qualifying, and then bang, Q3, and Lando, even after time deleted in the first run, out qualifying not only Max obviously, but also Piastri. And that is grip. And look how slow they were in a straight line. That's a great thing in Melbourne, isn't it? Because it doesn't really matter if you're slow on the straight in Melbourne. You've got the DRS and everything else, and the straights aren't that long. And it just all that was a pointer of how much downforce McLaren have. And they've got a massive amount of downforce compared with everybody else. So I think it's quite a worry. And actually, on a circuit like Melbourne, although Max has been saying all weekend, it's not a great track for us. He never really liked the new surface there, and the Red Bull never really goes that well there. In reality, if McLaren have a 3 tenths advantage in terms of grip level over Red Bull, that's going to show less at Melbourne than it will at other circuits, because Melbourne's a bit scratchy. The track picks up grip. There are a lot of variables. There's a bit of change in direction in there where you can sort of, a good Max will do a good job. If you get to a really clinical circuit, high downforce circuit, at the moment, based on everything, if Red Bull don't find a considerable amount of additional downforce, McLaren are just going to disappear. Disappear into the sunset. It'll be interesting in China, because it is a long straight in China, and there's enough corners there for Max to make up a little bit of time just with good setup, good driving, and getting a nice balance on the car for the entire race. But I can't imagine how anyone's going to beat a McLaren in qualifying around China.
Jeez. Meaning, therefore, Peter, that McLaren in that MCL 3.9 have the whip hand as far as the Drivers' Championship and the Constructors too.
Oh, they do. That's why I say, at the start of this show, for me, I was hoping that this was going to be, obviously McLaren had got the best car, and therefore let's hope it's going to be a Prost Senna year or a Piquet Mansell year or, a Fangio Moss year. But as I say, right now, it's kind of disappointing that that Piastri did what he did.
Yeah.
I mean, let's put it another way. If Nigel Mansell at his peak was in the other McLaren right now, do you think that he would have been out-qualified by Lando and trounced by Lando in the race?
Oh, never. But come on, Mr. Windsor, you're doing Oscar a bit of a disservice to compare him to.
Why?
To
I mean,
Nige.
he has to be that good if he is that good, if you see what I mean. If to be in the position he's in, much better than Daniel Ricciardo, and obviously because they've replaced Daniel with him. He's in a very good car, very good team, lots of natural talent, lots of wins behind him. He needs to be thinking, I can be world champion this year. Not, I want to win the world championship with McLaren. If I'm number 2 with Lando, that's great. That's not racing drivers' thought process. And I asked the question about Nigel, not because of comparing Nigel's talent with Oscar's talent, but comparing the mentality of the two. Do you think when Nigel was alongside Elio De Angelis and Mario Andretti, he was thinking, oh, these guys are, Mario's a world champion, Elio's won a Grand Prix. Do you think he's thinking, no, he's thinking, no, I can have these guys for breakfast. That was the mentality, wasn't it? Always was. And you've got to have that. You've got to have that self-belief. And I was with Nigel in, when was it, 81? Yeah, 81 Long Beach. And an American journalist said to Nigel Mansell, it was the only guy he could find to interview because all the other drivers had gone home and he was still sitting around the car in the arena, in the mid infield there. Nigel Mansell, how good do you think you can be, Nigel? And his reply was, how many world championships did Fangio win? Oh, was it 5? Yeah, okay. Well, I've got to win 6, haven't I? Oh, sorry, it's not the right Mansell accent. But anyway, I mean, obviously it was a stupid answer, but you get my point.
Yeah.
If you don't believe that every millisecond of the day, don't get in a racing car. Forget it.
Blimey.
Go rallying or something. Another point I'd just like to make is that I know Lando is a serious WRC fan. And I hope I'm not giving away too many secrets here when I say I know he's been out in WRC cars and he's unbelievably good. And he's also a very good golfer, like Nigel. And a lot of people say, oh, Windsor's just talking through his hat. But in my opinion, one of the reasons he did a really good job yesterday is that he's now got everything assembled in front of him that he needs in order to do the job. And I think the touch and the feel and the rhythm that he knows he has in golf and WRC rally cars showed itself a little bit in the semi-wet and wet yesterday. We saw some beautiful slides from Lando. I think this guy's leading the race. He's leading the race. He's got Max and George and Piastri and all those got a lot behind him. And he's having moments with the car and he's got the back end out like this and he's got the power on beautifully. And the way he held the car when he nearly ended in tears at mid-race, that was pure WRC talent mixed with golf sensitivity around the green. That was just superb to watch. That's one of the reasons I'm a Lando fan. I think he's got so much capacity around him, but a lot of people don't give him credit for because they see so much of him in the sort of social media stuff and Instagram. And of course, that doesn't touch even the surface of what he's all about.
I think many in the F1 space, myself included, Mr. Windsor, if I'm going to bring myself to the pulpit of truth, I've got to put some more respect on Lando's name. I didn't think he had that in his locker, if I'm being honest. That performance, I just thought, I was convinced that Max was going to steal his lunch money, as he has been doing for the past 12 months or so. New Lando, and shout out to him for saying as much in the press conference that the whole circumstance is new. I feel like this is something of a Lando 2.0 that we're seeing. Let's talk about Ferrari, Mr. Windsor, because I saw on your race review that you were none too pleased at the interaction between Lewis, Charles, and their race engineers respectively. Talk to me about that. What upset you in particular about the communication?
Well, it was very impolite, all of it. It was very impolite, particularly mid-race. I mean, those engineers are all clever guys. They're all there. I mean, racing drivers in 2025 have never been luckier than any in the history of the sport. They've got a million people out there all trying to help them win a Grand Prix. They've all got computers in front of them. They're all very good engineers. They've all got the right mentality. They're all racers. And I don't think there's any room for drivers trying to upstage their engineers on live radio during the Grand Prix. Do it behind closed doors in a debrief or a pre-brief, but don't do it on the radio because it's wasting valuable airtime when you can be talking about something important. And, when Charles was having that thing with his engineer about the water from the water bottle, his response should have been anything I can do about it, rather than, oh, thanks for stating the obvious, and then probably thinking for a millisecond, oh, that'll get me 10 million views on Instagram or whatever. And I just think it's got a bit out of hand. The model for this is the way the NASA astronauts talk to mission control. That's how it should be, I think. And I don't say that's how it should be in terms of a regulatory thing. I mean that's how it should be in terms of respect of the racing driver to their mission control, their pit wall. And, for Lewis in his first race, to be saying to his engineer, who's trying to say to him, he's basically trying to say to him, what are you doing stuck behind Albon? You need to start trying a few things, get your finger out and, try this with DRS, try that, whatever. I have no idea what they were doing. It was a K1, K3, whatever it was. And Lewis was just like, it was just like a child saying, I've done all that already. I know. The two most dangerous words in the English language, probably in every language, are I know. Because nobody ever knows everything. And there's always something to learn in every situation. And I was surprised that Lewis said that in his first race at Ferrari, because quite clearly he didn't know. He didn't get past him, did he? And I just think it's almost become a sort of fashionable thing now for the Ferrari drivers to trash their engineers on the radio. And I think I just like to see it stop, because I think it's wrong. And it just shows lack of respect. That's all I can say. And people that know me well or know my channel well know that I think respect is very important.
I love the sentiment, Peter. But if you permit me for a second to put on my Sir Lewis Hamilton cap, I grew increasingly frustrated at the communication for a couple of different reasons. I think there's a language/cultural barrier there. For example, when Lewis is saying, don't repeat, and then Adami goes and repeats the next instruction. I think the K1 overtake mode, Lewis is just saying, okay, so I know that it's there, like, stop telling me. When I get close enough, I will leverage it. And then the final thing on that is that it's almost like Lewis is brand new in the circumstance, and there will be these teething problems, and they'll kind of knock the edges off of each other. But I think there's something. I mean, you've taught me this, Mr. Windsor, that currency in F1 is bandwidth. That what makes Lewis and Max so great is their ability to drive a car at 10/10 on using 80% of their CPU. So I'd argue that Ferrari and their engineers need to give the information that's necessary, but not overload Lewis and Charles with data, just like GP does with Max. And I think there's improvement there as far as Ferrari and the way in which they're interacting with both Charles and
I've got to
Lewis.
disagree with you. I think Lewis's engineer gave him exactly the information that he needed, which you've just described. I don't think he overloaded him with information. He could have gone on about it. He was very, because you've got to read into what he's saying. He's saying, you've got this. And Lewis says, I know. And if I was an engineer, I would think, oh, well, he's going to do it. And then nothing happens. What are you going to say? If you go back and say, is it working? It's probably going to annoy Lewis. So you just repeat the question. Isn't that what you do if you're an engineer in mission control? And it's in the middle of the race, whatever it is. Of course you're leaving it to Lewis to make the decision. But it doesn't require Lewis to then have a conversation with him about, don't talk to me too much and this and that. Stay quiet and get on with the job. That's all I'm saying. I'm not, no engineer is perfect. No race team is perfect. All I'm saying is, it just sounded to me that Lewis was getting irritated by his engineer in race 1 at Ferrari. And if, as you say, there's a language issue, why wasn't that sorted out at the Bahrain test? Or all the meetings they've been having in Maranello all this time? I can't believe there's a language issue now that they haven't discovered in the middle of the Australian Grand Prix. I mean, Lewis has been a Ferrari driver in his head for at least a year now.
Yeah.
Why isn't he learning Italian anyway, if that's the problem?
It's a good chat. I think he's learning Italian.
Well, good. I'm sure he is. He's an intelligent guy, and I have massive respect for Lewis Hamilton. I always have. It's just that what I heard yesterday made me feel very uncomfortable, because I felt for the engineer. I just felt I wouldn't like to be spoken to like that. And it was the same with Charles. I mean, Charles he's got this thing about having a sort of fairly smart, cynical response when he doesn't like it, and that's uncalled for. I think it's uncalled for, and it demeans engineers. It demeans engineers because what you're saying, potentially we're saying, oh, out there in the public thing, the drivers showing that the engineers are giving them too much information or that. That's immediately demeaning the job those engineers are doing. All they're trying to do is help the guys.
Yeah, I agree with you. And you make a pertinent point, a good one about the respect issue, but I can forgive the drivers in the heat of the moment. I mean, it's raining.
I can't. You sort that out. You sort that out beforehand. Yeah. You know if they don't know when to talk to a driver and what to say, then the driver hasn't done enough work to make sure that they know. It's up to the driver to tell the engineer how to talk to them, when to talk to them, and what sort of information he needs. All that is easy to do. You sort all that out long before the first Grand Prix, long before it. And you're practicing it all during testing, and you're practicing it during briefs and everything else. You never leave any of those things to live chance. And I got the impression that's what was happening.
Yeah.
And you could almost blame Freddie Vasseur for this, because he should be on top of that, making sure that there's a total understanding of how to talk to the drivers, between the engineers and the drivers, whilst having respect for both parties. That's the job of, in my opinion, that would be the job of Freddie Vasseur. And it doesn't seem to be there.
Completely agree with that,
Mr. And it's not enough to say, oh, well, they're both superstars, they're bigger than the team. Well, that's rubbish. They're just human beings. They're just racing drivers in the car. And they want to win, and so do the engineers.
Very well said.
That was all my point. Maybe I'm the only person in the world that thinks that way, but I'm always going to think like that. I just don't like the way engineers are put down by any racing drivers. At the moment, it seems to be Ferrari more than anywhere, but it happens in other teams too. Yuki Tsunoda's quite good at doing that too.
He's quite good.
Maybe he's better now. I don't know.
Tsunoda-san. Let me just say this in defence of Charles and Lewis. I just felt like it was all a function of frustration. I think all of this fades to black, Peter, if when Lewis comes over the radio and says, is there more rain coming to Adami? Adama responds, either we're checking or we don't know yet. We're gonna come back to you. Adama's response was in the negative. No, there's no more rain coming. And then the rain comes, Peter, and it's like, oh no, how bad is it over at Ferrari, especially when Lewis is looking over to Mercedes, the Silver Arrow team. And it looks like for the first time in 4 years, they built themselves a half decent machine for Antonelli and George. It's like Lewis is...
Well, my response is, and I'm not going down a narrow path here, but my response to that is that Lewis is on the racetrack. He's got a feel for what's going on. I mean, Johnny Herbert won the European Grand Prix because he was looking at the clouds and the flag angles and the wind direction. It's not difficult to get a feel for storm clouds. The question is, what is the forecast? Not, is it going to rain? You're the engineer. You know what's going to happen. It's, what's the forecast? You think the guy was looking at the forecast, and the forecast said, no rain likely for the next 20 minutes. You think the guy's going to say, well, it's going to rain, Lewis? We don't know. I mean, he's an engineer. Give him credit. Give him credit for having a brain, Yeah. It's too easy on these sound bites from the radio to form an opinion about some faceless person in the garage who, doesn't seem to know what he's doing. It's nonsense. They're all very, very clever guys. And believe me, the weather is, something that they can read and understand. And if they get it wrong, it's because the weather forecasting has got it wrong. Nobody seemed to get it right. I mean, what was all that stuff on the Red Bull radio all about? In, out, no, in, out, stay out. And Max is saying, well, I just see the two McLarens go off. What do you want me to do? And so a lot of it is on the track, to be honest. And a lot of, frustration is the correct word there. Both drivers frustrated to have qualified so badly. As a result, obviously, not having any grip in Q3 or Q2, whenever it was. But then, they didn't actually move forward, really, did they?
No, I agree. What do you make of that Ferrari circumstance? I mean, you've cited Fred Vasseur that he needs to get his arms around it. I think
needs to get his round around the communication issues there. Sorry, don't go too far with that, because there's a limit to what Fred can do. But getting the drivers to understand how to treat the engineers and vice versa is not difficult, and it should have been done in the Bahrain test at the very latest, maybe even the Barcelona test. But in terms of the performance of the car, I think they'll be quite quick on the straight in China, and that will help them on the lap. So I wouldn't be surprised to see one, if not both, somewhere in the top 3 or 4 in qualifying in China. And give Charles a P3 grid position. He's always going to be sniffing around the podium, if not a win, isn't he? I mean, he's that sort of guy. So yeah, I think Ferrari probably will be up with Mercedes at China. It's not saying much, but whether they'll be ahead of Max, I don't know. I doubt it.
Oof. Oof. Go on then, Mr. Windsor. Talk to me about this rookie saga, because again, super difficult race for 6 rookies on the grid to start their F1 career. There's been a storm around Zak Brown and his crying after yeeting it into the barrier on the formation lap. What do you make of that, Mr. Windsor? Because someone in the community is saying, what are you crying for? You're a grown man. You make the mistake. You pay your penalty. Others are saying that Helmut Marko, in criticising Zak Brown and saying that some of his behaviour, getting hugged by Anthony Hamilton, showing the world his emotional side, that's embarrassing, to quote Helmut Marko. On what side of that fence do you sit, Peter?
Difficult one, actually. Firstly, no sympathy for Marco's comments, because if he didn't know what Zak Brown was like at least a year ago, if not 2 years ago, then he shouldn't be hiring him in the first place. So, I mean, does he only look at results and never actually get to understand who these drivers are? If he does, then he shouldn't be doing his job, really, should he? So how could he be surprised by any of that? That's the first reaction to what you've said. I think in general, just trying to think. I mean, what did Mika Hakkinen do when he had that
100%.
big shunt at Monza under the trees there?
Yeah.
Well, he was taken out of the race. Well, it was his mistake, wasn't it?
It was his mistake.
And he was just sitting under the trees. I think he was in tears.
He was in tears, sobbing.
Jackie Stewart, I've seen cry. Yeah, I haven't seen many other racing drivers cry like that, but yeah, everybody's different. I think it's kind of a nice side of his character, an emotional side of his character. But I don't think the solution is to say, toughen up, you're lucky to be doing what you're doing, you're a racing driver. I think the solution is to say, go and do 12 days of Rob Wilson quickly. That's the solution. And I think the frustration that Zak Brown was showing, and obviously the disappointment, actually summed it up for many of the young guys out there. All of a sudden, they found they're out of their depth, driving these Formula One cars in semi-wet, even on intermediates. They found it almost impossible, particularly on slicks in the case of Bortoleto and a few others. Well, obviously Piastri as well. And I think they're lost, because it goes back to my point. They don't do enough driving. There's too much emphasis on having a lot of races and all these sprint races, reverse grids and all that stuff, where you don't learn anything about how to drive the car. You learn about track craft and first corners and, impeding and all that rubbish, as I keep saying, but you don't actually learn how to drive with understeer or how to drive on slicks in the wet, because they don't go to Snetterton for 3 days and do that sort of testing. That used to be the case. And so they're all frustrated because they don't know what to do. And Zak Brown is saying, I'll learn from that mistake, which he has to say. But how will he learn? When is the next time he's going to be out in the semi-wet? May not happen this year. So how's he going to learn? How are they going to do that? Are they actually going to rent Fiorano for a day and cover the track with water and go and do some testing there? I don't know. Probably not, I would think. And so if they're all saying we need to understand what Rob Wilson's been saying all these years about long corners versus short corners, about loading up the rear unnecessarily, about not having a flat car at change of direction, about gentle firm on the brake pedal, about warning the car what you're going to do before you actually give it the substance of the input. We now need to understand what Rob's been saying, because for sure this guy knows what's going on, and we need to respect that. And we need to stop being racing drivers preening ourselves in front of mirrors in gyms thinking we're working hard, or looking at the analysis of the telemetry of our teammate thinking we're working hard. And we need to go and do 1,000 right-handers with understeer to learn how to reduce the understeer and get the rotation at exactly the right moment. That's what they need to be doing. And none of them are, because nobody's ever told them to do that, least of all Helmut Marko probably. I'm a Helmut Marko fan. I'm just saying, so far as Helmut goes, I think he should look a lot further than just the results. And if he didn't know that Zak Brown is a pretty sensitive guy, then he needs to re-examine how he looks at drivers, because he is a sensitive guy. Nothing wrong with that at all. He can be a very, very good racing driver. And as I say, he's got the glimmer of a touch of being able to drive a little bit like Antonelli on slow corners. And let's bring that out of him. But that's only going to happen if they give him a very rigorous Rob Wilson type 5 days in a row of how to use the throttle, the steering and the brakes to get the car in early, to leave. That doesn't leave margin, but it gives you a much bigger platform on which to manipulate the car when all the different variables come into play, like cold tires, for example, when the semi-wet. And if he started to do that, then he wouldn't be so frustrated and he wouldn't be so emotional. But if it's left as it is, it'll be like a scar that will eventually heal, but it won't go away. They won't put the stitches in when they should have.
Mr. Windsor, preaching the F1 gospel out here. Holy smoke. Let me ask you.
Well, it is what, that to me is the truth. That is reality. And anybody that either thinks that's rubbish or doesn't want to listen or doesn't listen at all is avoiding the truth.
The truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Mr. Windsor, let me, speaking of good drives, Mr. Windsor, let me ask you about Kimi Antonelli. I'll ask you this as simple as I possibly can. Is that proof positive, his drive at Albert Park, that Kimi Antonelli could be the next Max Verstappen or the next Sir Lewis Hamilton, the next Nigel Mansell or the next Ayrton Senna?
No, I don't think it was. To my eye, he was very, very good on slow and medium speed corners, but frighteningly spiky on fast corners. And he needs to improve massively, I think, on fast corners. But I love the way he drives, through 1, 2, 3, and then the other slow bit, run back at the end of the lap. He looked really good. Very maxy through there. Yeah, definitely. But, fast corners, stand back. I don't know how, I've never seen a driver with that contrast between his ability on medium and slow corners and fast corners. I've never seen that in my life. Usually, I worked so many years with Nigel and Carlos Reutemann that was never an issue. Nigel on fast corners was always absolutely perfect. Weight transfer, everything was spot on, as was Carlos. But Kimi just seems to be like, I don't know what he's doing on those fast corners. And it doesn't surprise me. I know Parabolica is not a fast corner. It doesn't surprise me with that very fast approach to Parabolica that he had that shunt now. When I look at the way he was driving in Melbourne on the fast bits of road there. And so until he gets on top of that, I would say definitely he will never be another Max, no. And will he get on top of that? I don't know. I don't know whether the Mercedes engineers think or are aware of that even, or even talk about that with him. Or if he's aware of it. I have no idea. I'm just saying, from my eye, that's how it looked to me, and it looks pretty frightening to me, that how he is on quick corners.
Yeah, he's you've got to risk weight his gains. It feels like he's taking a lot of risk through the medium to high speed. Unnecessarily so, because he's so good on the slow stuff. And let's face it, if you're quick on slow corners, you're actually very quick in Formula One, because there's a lot of slow corners in the season. That's where you have to be really quick, not lose time on slow corners. Yeah.
But fast corners, he just needs to be much softer. He just needs to back away a little bit and just let the car settle and, find his rhythm there. I'm sure, I guess he probably naturally will. And I guess it's a function of being so young, so little road dust. What he's just done he went from Formula, whatever it was, 4 to Formula 2, not much testing, not much running, and then straight into Formula 1.
Yeah.
How can he be expected to have you could say his short game is really good, but off the tee, he keeps hitting a few trees. And he needs to just spend a bit of time on the tee, really. How he's going to do that, I don't know, in this hectic world of Formula One, where you're not allowed to test, not allowed to do anything. Go to the simulator, and he'll be great in the simulator because it won't show up any of that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Go on then. Outside of Kimi Antonelli, which one of the rookies, as far as their performance on Sunday, which one of them stood out as a guy that you'd say, okay, so he's got something. Let's move forward with him.
Well, they're all quick. they're all late breakers. They all get the power on as soon as they can. They all have great balance when the car's oversteering. They're all quick. But, I'm a purist, I guess, and I'm only therefore really interested in drivers. That's not interested, that's the wrong word, but the drivers that impress me and get me excited are the drivers that drive like Max Verstappen or Lewis Hamilton at his peak, or Kimi Räikkönen at his peak, or Carlos or Jim Clark or Nigel Mansell, or a few others. And maybe Isaac Hadjar's got a bit of that. Maybe, as I said before, looked like it in Formula 2. Haven't seen it in Formula 1. And Kimi has it. Of the others, Bortoletti looks pretty wide and standard Formula 2, super quick, as does Colapinto. Jack Doohan similarly. But, great race driver, I think, Jack. It's a shame that he had that shunt. He just seems to have bad luck, doesn't he? I hate using the word luck, but it's just a shame because I'd love to have seen him in that race. Yeah. And who else is there? Oliver Behrman. I mean, he's definitely very wide turn in, loading up the car, too much load on the car, change of direction. But good head, very nice guy, I got to say. And drove all right in the race, didn't he? He went round and round, but same speed as Ocon almost, so that was all right. I think he's probably got quite a lot of potential if he could just shorten his corners a bit and give himself a bit of breathing room and not brake so late and just think about rotation points and breaking into a different rotation point rather than the geometrical apex. I think he'd be a much better driver. But again, I'm not sure that's in the curriculum for any of the young drivers today. I don't think it is at all.
Mr. Windsor, more than generous with your time as always. As we round third base, let me ask you my final question this way. Max Verstappen said something contentious, so too Lando Norris in the post-race presser. When asked whether it was sensible to have the tractors out on track and still have the drivers driving around, although behind the safety car, whether that was a sensible thing to do, Max Verstappen responded something to this effect and said, well, listen, if there's a safety car and it's changeable conditions and you somehow manage to yeet it into the tractor, then you've got to be pretty stupid. Lando Norris saw Max Verstappen that and raised him that you shouldn't be in F1 if you're making those sort of mistakes. To that, Mr. Windsor, you respond how, sir?
100% correct. What more can you do? If you stop the race every time there's a tractor on the circuit, it's, I think, we have a difference between a virtual safety car and a safety car, don't we? And so if it was only virtual safety car conditions with tractors, maybe you could say, well, maybe some guy's going to aquaplane or whatever. But behind a safety car, I think both drivers are totally correct. And lucky that we have the tractors to get rid of these cars and to put them into safer positions, because that wasn't always the case, of course. And so, they're both correct.
Fair. Isn't it Jules Bianchi and the very nature of that incident, doesn't it conjure images of we should never have tractors on it? I mean, Suzuka a couple of years back, you had Pierre Gasly driving around desperately, 10 tenths, trying to get to the back of the safety car train, whilst you've got a tractor out on track, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, the safety of the drivers always needs to be paramount. Do you think against that backdrop?
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think the tractors were out until they were in line behind the safety car.
So to Albert Park, absolutely. But
yes. So that's what they need to do. That's how they've learned from the Bianchi accident.
Yeah, agreed. No.
So obviously you don't want to start having tractors out there when people are still trying to make up time to get to the safety car. But when they're all in line, everybody's comfortable and they're going down the pit lane or whatever, that's when you can put the tractors out. Yeah.
Agreed. No, makes sense. Mr. Windsor, you've been a legend as per usual. If you enjoy market-leading insight from Mr. Peter D. Windsor, the goatiest F1 journo to have ever goated, then get over to Peter Windsor on YouTube. If you're not already subscribed, what are you doing with your life? Shortly thereafter, on your favourite podcasting platform, hit a follow, give a like to the Short Quarters podcast. I can't reiterate more. the GOATiest, the most market-leading F1 insights.
That's
and
enough,
stories.
Cameron. That's enough.
Genuinely,
But you might
though,
like to
Peter.
say that my YouTube videos from Melbourne are now also available on Spanish and Italian audio tracks as well, with me speaking fluent Italian and Spanish. Yeah, right. And they will be all year. So yeah, if you got any friends or any more associates that would prefer to listen to in other languages, there you go.
Bravo, sir. Market leading for the avoidance of doubt, as per usual. Guys, if you're watching this on the YouTubes, like, comment, subscribe as per usual. If you're listening to this on your favourite podcasting platform, like, follow, 5 stars, all the usual gubbins. Between now and next time, you guys have been legends. But remember, as always, to look but never stare.